So, Katy, let's start about you becoming a police officer. When did you realise you wanted to do it? Because it's not every little girl's dream, is it?
No, it isn't, not at all. And it wasn't my little girl's dream at all. So, as John said, I went to London School of Economics and I did a sociology degree. And in my third year, I started to do some kind of theories of crime work, and I got interested in girl gangs, not joining one, but actually writing about them. And at the same time, I was doing my black belt in karate. I have a black belt. And I was interested in why women became violent and why they might join gangs and that kind of thing. So having finished my degree, I then saw jobs advertised for policing and thought, oh, that's interesting, might put some, not the fighting necessarily, but might some of the learning into practice. And so I joined, and there's no policing in my family. There's military, but there's no policing in my family. So first in the family to join the police. But my mum will say, actually, it was the murder of Jill Dando in my late teenage years that was actually the kind of thing that really sparked an interest in crime. And I was so cross, I was so angry. She says that actually is probably kind of one of the key reasons of why I joined the police, which I think is really, I don't really remember that, but she's adamant that I was so angry about the murder of Jill Dando. I wanted to do something about it. And so that's where I kind of got my interest, I suppose.
So when you joined, how much of it has been what you expected and how much of it has been not what you thought you were signing up for?
So I joined in 2000, which feels like yesterday, but makes me feel actually quite old because now we have so many officers. I'm much older than many of the other younger officers that are joining us now. So I've been in 23 years this year. Started my career at Cowley Police Station. Became the beat bobby for Blackbird Leys, so on my bicycle on Blackbird Leys. My key memory of Blackbird Leys is riding my bike around, if many of you know the area, around the estate, and somebody throwing an empty pop Coca-Cola bottle at me, and it landing on my police helmet and falling on the floor. And could I find the person that had done it? No, I couldn't, but I tried really hard. But I loved the community beat work, what we would now call neighbourhood policing work, and I've kind of come in and out of that throughout my career, as much as I've also been a detective throughout my career. So really good memories of starting off as a police officer. And I think, when you join, as in my early 20s, and it was exciting, and you put the blue lights on, and I actually joined because I went on a ride along, and I was just talking to Geraldine about it. Come out with the police, come on a ride along. We invite members of the public to come out with us to see what we do. And I remember going to Bicester Police Station, where the sergeant was called Sergeant, which was really odd. And going out with a lady up there, and we went to a dog bite, and I'm petrified of dogs. I'm still pretty scared of dogs, but at that time I was really petrified of dogs. But we did a dog lineup to work out. It makes you cringe now, but there was
like a dog identity parade.
There was 4 or 5 dogs, and we had to try and get the victim to identify which of these dogs in this garden had bitten her. It was a small bite. It wasn't anything significant or serious.
Presumably they don't all line up.
No, they didn't. But I just thought, oh my God, if this is what policing is about, then I've got to join because it's such fun. And it has been complete fun throughout my career, but it's also been horrific. And I don't want you to go away thinking, policing is just something that people don't take seriously, because we absolutely do. And there have been some terrible times and some awful things. But I think when I joined, I was really naive. I went to an all-girls school here in Oxford. I was very naive around life, around what community is like. Pardon? Not quite. And so I think, for me, it was quite a shock, realising how awful people can be to each other, quite frankly. But also, at the same time, just provided me with that passion to do something about it, passion to help, passion to, work with communities to make things better. And that's driven throughout my career, really, how I've worked.
When you joined, do you think there are more women now in the force than when you joined? Yeah,
so now we're about over 40% of our recruits are women. When I joined, it was much, much lower than that. And I think back now and think the year 2000 wasn't very long ago. It doesn't feel very long ago. But actually, some of the language used we were the lumpy jumpers, the women on the force. And when there was 2 women in a police car, we were the petticoat panda. And you talk about that kind of misogynistic language or the kind of issues that we are still talking about now across policing and wider. And it is absolutely not like that. You know, I reassure you, it is not like that anymore. But you kind of think, well, what's happening now that in 20 or 25 years' time we'll go, God, I can't believe that was how we talked to each other, or that was what was happening. So it is a very different service now. I think it is a service that is really equal. I think there are opportunities, whoever you are, whatever your background, whatever your skills. And I would encourage anybody to join the police. I just
and are
think
you
it's a
all
great career.
police officers now rather than WPCs?
Yeah, that went out a long time ago.
Yeah,
we don't.
So I remember having an argument. So I remember having an argument about it at the BBC, where I was saying we shouldn't be saying a male nurse and we shouldn't be saying WPCs, and I was told to carry on doing it, and I said, but it's not right, because because you always identify someone's gender with the follow-up words. You don't have to say what they do.
No, we haven't. I don't think I've ever used that in my career, to be honest, with WPC.
So you, as you were explaining, so you started off on the ground, and everyone who makes their way up the police force has done that work on the ground, which isn't the same in other organisations. It's not the same in mine, not the same in the BBC. How important is that?
It's really important, but it's changing. So historically, you have always started as a police constable, and then you can work your way up through your career: police sergeant, police inspector, chief inspector, superintendent, chief superintendent, and then you get to assistant chief constable, where I am. Deputy chief constable, and you kind of go through the ranks, and then within each of those ranks you can go into detective roles, and there's a huge variety of work or roles that you can do. I think it's really good that you have that operational experience, but there are new methods of joining now. You can do what we call direct entry. So you can come in at either an inspector or a superintendent rank as a direct entry police officer. You still do that work. You still go out on patrol. You still do the night shifts, but you do it in a much shorter time period. So over a couple of years rather than over 10 or 15 years, so you get that experience. But what I think is good is that at every rank, you are still a police constable at the end of the day. That is, that is who you are, that is what you are. You have those powers of arrest. And we encourage all of our officers at whatever level to be out and about, to be visible and to be, proactive where they can be. So I was on the bus the other day with the Chief Constable from headquarters in Kidlington into Oxfordshire County Council. I'm notorious for having foot chases and making arrests. Don't go out with me because I cause trouble, is probably what I would say. If I can tell a story, I was on Good Morning Britain, actually. I was in London on Good Morning Britain last summer with Sharon Gafka, who I'm sure all of you are Love Island fans in here, but Sharon is a Love Island contestant. From Didcot, from a couple of years ago. And she's been working with Thames Valley Police on our Violence Against Women and Girls campaign and work.
She's quite involved in spiking, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. So I've been working really closely with Sharon, and we went on Good Morning Britain together to talk about it. And we were talking about domestic abuse, we were talking about sexual assault, rape, all of those kind of things. And came out of the studios in London, the national studios, and I was walking back to the hotel with our two ladies from my communications team. Sharon had gone off, and I came across a domestic in the street, and I was dressed like this. I didn't have any kit on, I just had my denim jacket on. I didn't have my baton or my cuffs or anything. And this couple, who clearly had drug and alcohol issues, were having a domestic argument, and then the man punched the woman in the face. She dropped to the floor, blood everywhere. And I kind of thought, oh my gosh, I've just talked about it on national television. I have to intervene, and ended up in a foot chase and a wrestle with this man who was actually a high-risk domestic abuse offender, and the Met Police were called, and they came and arrested him and dealt with him. He went straight to prison, actually, from court the next day. So, I don't want anyone to think that you, as a senior officer, don't get involved. You absolutely do, and I take that very seriously, my role as a police officer.
You obviously do take it all very seriously. You mentioned the Met there. We probably ought to touch on the stories that have made the headlines about the Met and the officers and the way that it's been led. Yeah. Because I think that does affect people's perception of the police for wider forces. It
does, absolutely.
Do you feel it's affected public confidence?
Yeah, it absolutely has. And as a member of the public, you see a police officer. You don't see necessarily a Thames Valley police officer or Metropolitan police officer or any other police officer. There are 43 police forces in England and Wales, and then we have Police Scotland as well. So anything that happens in one force will, by default, I think, affect other forces. We are very close proximity to the Metropolitan Police. You know, Thames Valley goes all the way down to Slough, so we have Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. We border the Met. We do a lot of cross-working with them. But, you know, I, as much as my colleagues here in the room probably from the force, absolutely, you know, awful, atrocious what happened to Sarah Everard and the officer. You know, we don't even speak his name, what he did. He was not a police officer. That's not what I know to be a police officer. But there's absolutely no doubt that and the David Carrick case, who was, you know, one of the most serious sexual offenders in history, a police officer from the Metropolitan Police, has an impact on what you, and indeed, you know, what I think around policing and colleagues. So it is a battle to then, you know, try and persuade people that the police are here to protect you. We are here to help you, that the majority, the absolute majority, are here to do good. And it's very difficult to measure trust and confidence. You know, there isn't a survey across the nation to how much do you... There's these generic surveys around, do you trust judges, do you trust journalists, do you trust police officers? But, you know, we can't be sure that the community trust us.
And that confidence is so important.
It is, because you want people to be confident to report. You want people to have a good service when they do report issues to the police. And we are doing lots of work internally and externally to try and provide that confidence, to try and provide information about what we do, what happens when you report a crime, particularly those crimes around vulnerability, you know, rape and sexual assault and domestic abuse. We want women and girls in particular to feel confident in reporting.
People often say that they feel more confident, they feel safer when they can see police officers on the street. Mm-hmm. Does that translate in reality into lower crime levels, or is it simply a perception that people are safer because they can see police officers?
The evidence base is that it's a perception. So the academic research around police visibility is that it's a perception. You could have police officers wandering around all the time, actually wouldn't come across a crime. What you need to do is really understand where your hotspots are, where the crime is happening. And then if you put your visible police officers in those spaces, that's when you reduce crime and that's when you catch the criminals. So we've done, you know, just as an example, we've done quite a lot of work in Thames Valley around, with our violence reduction unit, around, we have a hotspot app now that are, in fact, you might be able to have a look on the people here on their phones, which will, through our intelligence gathering and information gathering, show us where we need officers to patrol. And when we say patrol, we don't mean drive through, we mean get out of the car, talk to people, talk to your community. And we have hotspots all around Thames Valley Force area where we know are violent crime hotspots. And we're just doing another piece of work to work out where the sexual crime is in relation to that as well. And we know that where we put our officers in those right places at the right times, we can reduce crime because they're patrolling in the right place, so they are deterring. But actually, you know, at the end of the day, policing is all around that local policing piece, the neighbourhood policing that your officers are here today. Those neighbourhood police officers are critical, and we recognise that as a force. And actually, I don't think we have invested enough in neighbourhood policing over the last few years. But that has changed. We've got a new Chief Constable at the moment, and we are absolutely invested in neighbourhood policing. So quite a lot of our funding is going into making sure we've got more neighbourhood officers who can deal with that community issues and pick up that community crime and be that visible deterrent on the street, which is what we think or we know our communities want.
And where does antisocial behaviour fit into that? Because almost everyone has a story of going into a town centre late at night, and there is normally a hotspot where the teenagers are gathering. Now, they may not be physically going to harm anyone, but actually it's a very intimidating experience to be walking through. I know in Essex, there's a story this week or last week, how one town there, they were deploying an officer to one of those hotspots, and it had really helped tackle it.
And I think that's what we're doing through that hotspot work is yes, it picks up serious violence, but we can manipulate it. So if there is a certain spike in a certain type of crime, then we can look at that. We can look through our intelligence reports and information that's coming in from the community and use our neighbourhood teams to go and do that kind of work. But also there's now a nationally recognised app for your phone and a website called streetsafe.co.uk. It's a good one to download if you have a mobile phone, because with that you can just put in your location, kind of geocache where you are and what the issue is, and it will report in nationally and then be fed out to the local police force and to the local neighbourhood teams. So it is you can use it for environmental issues like the lights are out on a street corner, a bit like you'd use Fix My Street here in Oxfordshire from the County Council, but there is a kind of nationally recognised web page for it. But you can also write where you feel uncomfortable. So you might not want to ring 999. You might think it's not enough for 999 or 101, but I want to tell the authorities about it. So through that app, you can put in, if you see there's a dodgy bloke hanging around on a street corner every time you go for a run, for example, you can record that. Or if there is groups of antisocial behaviour, you can record that and it will filter through into the local police force. So there are mechanisms to tell us we can't do things if we don't know. So I would always encourage people to report, one way or the other.
Is there a target time for police to get to someone who's in difficulty?
There are different. So when you ring 999, we triage. Our control room will triage the threat and the harm and the risk that's happening. So if, for example, you are a victim of a burglary and it's happening there and then and there are people in your house, that's what we would call a priority 1, and we would try and get there within 15 to 20 minutes. It would invariably be much quicker in cities than it would in a rural population. If you are there's a fight in progress and it's happening there and then and people are being hurt, that is an emergency response, and that's when you get the blue lights on and we get the cars there quickly. We then have priority 2, priority 3, and we will look at, has the offender gone? So the risk is gone, but we still need to capture evidence. We might come within the hour. Is it a more slow time investigation around malicious communications or a harassment that we might want to come within a 24-hour period? So we have different levels depending on the crime, depending on what's happening, and that's why we just need as much information from you when you call in about what is happening there and then for us to be able to assess it, because we haven't got lots of police officers, so we need to work out where we need to go at the right time.
You mentioned burglaries.
Yeah.
I think that arouses quite strong feelings amongst people, because I think there's a frustration that people feel that burglaries aren't taken seriously and they aren't. You mentioned obviously if someone's in a house, that's very different to getting home and finding being broken into. There was a story out a couple of days ago that half the neighbourhoods in England and Wales have not had a single burglary solved in the last 3 years. How big a challenge are burglaries in terms of policing them, but also they can be it's a crime, isn't it, where people can lose out financially, but emotionally that should be their safe space.
Horrific. And now to have people in your house, absolutely horrific. I think burglary is quite interesting because the figures have gone down significantly over the last few years. Now, that was even pre-COVID. Numbers of burglaries have gone down. Throughout COVID, as you can imagine, most people are at home. Burglary really did reduce significantly. We are just starting to see it rise now nationally. So we're starting to get a few more burglaries. I think you may well have seen there's been some national news recently around some forces don't go to every single burglary. We in Thames Valley have always gone to every burglary. We've never made a decision not to attend, but some forces have, when I talk about that triage and prioritisation. So in Thames Valley, if you are subject to a dwelling burglary, a domestic burglary in your house, you will absolutely get a response. And we will more than likely send out our forensic teams as well to take fingerprints and those kind of things. It's interesting, burglary, because it can be tricky to solve, but at the same time, if your local teams are good and they've got good knowledge, and we have really good central, we call them priority crime teams, but they're essentially our burglary unit. They know who the offenders are. They track people when they're coming out of prison. We know people come back and reoffend in their same areas. So we do as best we can in terms of trying to solve all of those. But I am concerned that we are starting to see a rise, and I think there may be some complacency around. We haven't had huge numbers over the last few years with COVID, and as people leave their homes, are you doing the things to keep your home safe? Do you have lights that turn on and off when you're not there? If you can afford it, have you got your own kind of CCTV cameras? Those kind of things. Protect your own world as much as you rely on us to reactively come and deal with the problem.
Because we can talk about the priorities the force has. You mentioned neighbourhood policing and talked about teenagers and antisocial behaviour. Explain a bit about county lines and why it's such a problem.
So we classify county lines as criminal exploitation, particularly of children, because it's generally children that are involved in county lines. So county lines is how drugs move from one area to another along what is called a county line. But a county line is actually a phone line, and it's how you would get drugs if you were after some. And what happens invariably is the drug dealers and the organised criminals that run the lines, they run the phone lines that deal the drugs, invariably need to recruit young people, kids, to be their runners, to do the dealing. And they will do that recruitment through a variety of methods. They will look for children that look vulnerable, so kids that are not in school, for example. They will offer gifts. They might give them drugs to try, and then they're hooked, and they say, right, we've given you some drugs, so now you owe us some money. And they will use tactics to say, we gave you some trainers, you owe us 200 quid, and if you don't give it to us, then we'll go and kill your mum. It's things like that, which when you're 13, 14, you don't feel like you can tell anybody, and you're all of a sudden kind of involved in this criminal activity. And the way you pay off that debt that they have kind of forced you into is by getting you to sell drugs and take drugs around. So that's what we see. And it's awful. It's really awful. It's awful for the families. It's awful for the children. But it needs, quite frankly, a more community approach to try and solve it. It's not something that the police on their own will be able to solve.
Organised crime generally it's not a quick fix,
No, it's not. And we're talking about all sorts here, and there's all sorts to talk about. And you were starting to see the plethora of things that policing deals with, and how do we make decisions on the basis of our limited resources with what we focus on and what we do. But organised crime is significant. We have a regional organised crime unit which covers Thames Valley Police and Surrey and Sussex and Hampshire. We then have within Thames Valley itself a serious organised crime unit, our SOCU. Within the SOCU we have surveillance teams, and we have a drugs focused task force, and they are dealing with, frankly, millions of pounds worth of drugs moving in and out of Thames Valley and in and out of the country when you look at the South East Organised Crime Unit. We had brilliant activity over COVID, actually, with, and you may well have seen this in the news, something called EncroChat. So EncroChat was an encrypted app that organised criminals internationally were using to deal drugs. And through some foreign intervention by the French and the Belgian authorities, they intercepted the EncroChat phones and were able to download all of the data for criminality internationally. And some of that was in Thames Valley. And we were able, through COVID, to pick up some, quite frankly, huge investigations into serious organised criminals dealing in drugs, firearms, people trafficking as well, and conduct some interventions. I wrote loads of stats down, but I won't go through them. But we've ended up with just that over the last year. We've got in its entirety about 500 years in prison for serious organised crime. So it's not just a Thames Valley thing. We work nationally and internationally to try and deal with this. But actually, the impact of an international crime investigation is there are children on our streets that are having to deal drugs and are scared to tell their families about it.
So how long, one on TV, BBC does it, ITV does it, when we have those shots, we're invited on the early morning raids where someone's going to bang on a door and knock it down and go in and drag out people, and often they'll find drugs, and they'll find lots of cash, and they'll find knives or firearms. How long could that potentially have been building up to that moment where you actually go and find the people.
Yeah, it could have been. So some of our investigations do go on for a few years. We try and do things quickly, but sometimes when you're doing that proactive work, you need to build a picture, and that can take time. So it can be anything from a few days. You know, we get some intelligence that we think we've got to do something about this. We go and get a warrant, we go and do it, right through to let's do a proactive surveillance investigation where you don't see us. Because often you don't know what we're doing.
Because often when we see Thames Valley Police bashing down a door, there's been a similar operation going on in Birmingham and a similar one in London at the same time.
And that's when it's that coordinated approach, which is done in conjunction with our regional organised crime units and the NCA, the National Crime Agency, and then they quite often will be working with Interpol or European crime agencies as well. Yeah, so when we do that big bang, it's good because you're taking out all the targets across. But it is a bit like whack-a-mole, they just keep popping up.
So organised crime is a big thing. Cybercrime is becoming a huge problem. It became a problem for me a couple of days ago. Yeah. So the BBC, all my data has been taken in this huge hack by Russians, by Zealous, who oversee payroll for the BBC. So it is tens of thousands of people whose national insurance number, addresses, passwords have been taken and are being held to ransom by this Russian gang. So the only support we can get is contacting Experian and monitoring if our credit gets used. How much time and resources are allocated to online fraud and cybercrime?
I've opened my bit of paper because I wanted to just double check the stats around fraud. So fraud and cyber accounts for between 40 and 50% of all crime. Massive impact. And much of it is dealt with nationally. So we have Action Fraud, who are the kind of national organisation that pick out how to deal with the kind of upstream, and it is internationally recognised that it's state-sponsored criminality from Russia, from other areas.
This is what we've had, but at the lower end, the more common end really is the phone call of someone taking your details.
Phishing, so phishing with a PH, which is where you'll get an email which makes it look like it's from the TV licensing agency or something that you know, that you then click in, and John is here who works for us in our IT department and will know more than I will some of the detail, but it's about how you gather people's information and data by persuading them that you're somebody that you are not, and that is a real problem. The other thing that's a real problem that really increased during COVID is romance fraud, particularly amongst older population who are targeted online by somebody who they start up a relationship with, and then all of a sudden you think you're in love with somebody and you transfer your savings for them to come over from another country perhaps, or whatever it might be. We've got loads of really good stuff on our website around romance fraud. We've got some really good people in that team helping individuals, but people feel quite embarrassed to tell the police about that. You don't want others to know.
Because when you hear the stories,
they're heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, but also you kind of sit there and go, gosh, they do seem like they've been quite gullible.
Yes.
But of course, these are scams that are built up over time.
Over months, if not even longer, and can be really significant. So, it's there's a plethora of things that go on around fraud, right from that, somebody's got your credit card details, right through to the stuff you're talking about, the Russian hacking. And it is really, really difficult. And policing can do some of the response in terms of that reactive response, but actually we need organisations and others to be involved in that as well, and they are.
So are you more likely to become a victim of crime in your own home now with cyber fraud than on the streets?
Yes, yeah. That or domestic abuse. So domestic abuse is the other significant crime type, which accounts for, get my figures probably wrong, but about 30% of our activity. And yes, absolutely, that is what's happening in people's homes.
The way the police respond to domestic abuse has changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I've been the lead in Thames Valley for violence against women and girls for the last 18 months, and it has been our absolute focus to deliver better outcomes for victims of domestic abuse and sexual abuse, and we are seeing that tide turn. We are seeing more cases in court. We are seeing much better outcomes, but I'm not complacent. There's always more that we can do. I think victims are telling us more. We're seeing increase in reporting, and that's great. I think we're seeing the ages of victims of domestic abuse going down and up. So we're seeing a lot more of the elderly population being subjected to domestic abuse. But I do a lot of academic, in my spare time, I do a lot of academic work on domestic abuse. I write academically on domestic abuse. And some of the research I'm involved in at the moment is looking at teenage and adolescent victims of domestic abuse when they are not victims because their parents are involved in a domestic abuse relationship, but are in a relationship themselves where there is sexual violence or perhaps coercive control or physical assault. And the national domestic abuse legislation says domestic abuse only happens if you're 16 and above. And I think that's wrong. I think that actually there are some of our children in relationships which have exactly the same types of activity, and that's a gap. That's a kind of an academic gap, but that's also a policing gap. So I'm working with the Domestic Abuse Commissioner of England and Wales and the Home Office to unpick that at the moment as a result of some of the research I've been doing to see whether that needs to be changed, and there needs to be a kind of a national parliamentary debate around that. So it's quite exciting to be involved in, but I think, you know, there is something that we and I can contribute in relation to, you know, how seriously we take it. I'm absolutely passionate about getting better in terms of our domestic abuse response.
Domestic abuse and sexual assaults, rape and other sexual assaults, they seem like they're potentially quite hard to prosecute. You often hear statistics about women who've reported being raped, but you have relatively few convictions compared to the number that are reported. Why does that happen? What needs to change to kind of make that a more realistic outcome?
So I think to start off with, I think the numbers that we get reported are the tip of the iceberg. So I don't think people do report as much as goes on, and we will probably never know that. But I think it is, rape in particular is a really difficult offence to prosecute.
Do you think women realise that they can be raped within their marriages?
Well, so the domestic abuse legislation only changed in the 90s. It was legal to rape your wife until, I think it's 1990.
Which is unbelievable.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's just disgraceful when you think about it. So, yeah, there probably still are some individuals, some people that think that. But I think with our rape investigations, and to a certain extent much of our domestic abuse, it's behind closed doors. It becomes a one word against the other. It becomes an issue of consent and how you prove consent. And they are really tricky investigations to deal with. And then you take it through the criminal justice system, and the Crown Prosecution Service, you know, want to have the very best investigations going into the court process. Into the court process, our justice system is a jury. It's really interesting. Police in Scotland, they've just taken, they're doing some pilot work around not having jury trials in rape investigations, and just having a judge overseeing the investigation to see if you can actually get more convictions when it is a single judge making the decision on the basis of the evidence, rather than a jury of your peers, which I think is an interesting development around some of this. But I think at every step of the way, there is still work to be done, every step of that criminal justice process, to try and improve conviction rates in particular. I think there's really good support for victims now. Well, I hope there's good support. You know, we work really closely with the Police and Crime Commissioner, who his office will commission all those kind of victim services. We have really good liaison officers. We call them SOLOs, sexual offence liaison officers. So we're really supportive of the victim, but it is a long and drawn out process. And quite frankly, you know, people have to think really carefully about taking the steps to report, and knowing how difficult it is. Some women, and it is majority women who are raped, you know, just don't want to take those steps.
Do you think when it's get covered in soap operas, Coronation Street's done a big line about consent, does that help or hinder with the police work?
It's interesting. I think I don't watch Coronation Street, although I did watch Gogglebox this week, and it had Casualty on, which I'll come on to in a second. So I don't watch. I haven't watched soaps for a long time, but I hear, and in fact this is one of the conversations I'm having with Sharon Gafka, and one of the things she talks about is how unrealistic it is on television compared to what it is in real life. And that's why she's come out to our sexual assault referral centres to do her own kind of video report to share with the people who follow her on Instagram, to explain the realities, because it isn't like television. I was really pleased. I was watching, I don't know if people watch Gogglebox, I was just watching it at the weekend, and Casualty was on, and they did a spiking story, and I thought that was really good actually, because they talked about Ask for Angela, which is our a national campaign about how you ask for support in pubs and clubs if you're feeling uncomfortable. The things like she was trying to text her friend and tell her where she was. I just thought it was done very well actually, in terms of picking out some of the.
And they also
things.
have it's a doctor who's aware of the risks of having someone spike your drink.
Yeah.
And he's very careful and rejects somebody who approaches in the club.
Yeah.
Is befriended by someone who seems very straight and
and actually he's the baddie.
Person. He's the baddie.
You just never know. You never know.
Knife crime.
Yes.
It must be a top priority
Yes,
for the police. How do you think that's evolved into becoming such a problem for young men?
Yeah. So it is absolutely a problem, and it is increasingly becoming a problem, knife crime. I don't think I have the answer as to why. I think there is something around education, there is something around what young people have to do. There is something around the things we've talked about, organised crime, drugs, those kind of issues. I think some young people carry a knife for protection and not realising that the more likely you are that you carry a knife for protection, the more likely you are to get stabbed, frankly. There has been some academic research around that. So I think there is all sorts of things that contribute to that.
It was the big story about Ollie Stevens.
Yes, it was from Reading.
He was from Reading. He was, if you didn't know that story, he was he 13, and he was stabbed in sort of a field, a beauty spot area called Bugs Bottom, in a murder that involved a girl persuading him to go there. It had all been engineered through social media, and his father is campaigning to try to stop children seeing knives and knife crime on social media.
Yeah. And my personal kind of view is you play computer games, you get killed, you get back up again, and there's all sorts of things that will impact on that. We've just had the Knife Angel in Thames Valley. I don't know if people have seen the Knife Angel, but it's a huge monument around knife crime made up of thousands of knives that have been either taken from individuals by policing or put into a knife bin when we have campaigns around it. And that went to Milton Keynes and then Slough. And I think there's arguments either way around whether displaying knives actually contributes to people wanting to carry them or not. But I think the main thing is it starts a discussion about what is right, what is wrong, why you might carry one, what the implications might be. And we've been doing something called Op Deter in Thames Valley over the past few months, which is a really strong anti-knife crime campaign where if you are caught with a knife and you are over 18, you are highly likely to be charged and remanded. We will do everything we can to deal with your case in custody there and then, not bail you, and you will be put before the courts, and the courts and the Crown Prosecution Service are working with us to do a really quick turnaround and kind of say enough is enough. And then if you're under 18 and you're caught with a knife, we have a whole load of activity with our youth justice teams around interventions to try and educate. So that there's lots going on in this space, but again, it's about working in partnership with others to try and educate, intervene, and get young people involved in other stuff as well.
You mentioned the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've mentioned him often on our programme on the BBC. Sometimes a bit of a mysterious figure.
Yeah.
That they're elected, but nobody seems to really know, because maybe not necessarily knows exactly what they do and how they relate to the force.
Yeah.
So where,
how does it work?
So if it was like an organisational pyramid, where does Matthew Barber, the current police crime commissioner,
so you'd have Jason Hogg as our chief constable at the top of the triangle for the police, and then you have Matthew Barber, who is the police and crime commissioner, who is a completely different entity. He is not a police officer. He is not a part of Thames Valley Police. He is an elected official. He's a Conservative police and crime commissioner, but they can be independent or from any other political party. And he has the role of holding the police chief constable to account. So we used to have something called police and crime panels, And the police and crime panel was made up of a variety of officials who would hold the chief constable to account. That was moved into this political post a number of years ago, and the PCC is elected every 4 years to hold the chief to account. They can hire and fire the chief constable. They are not allowed to get involved operationally. So they are not a police officer, they don't have that operational power, and they can't get involved in saying you should be doing this or you should be doing that. But what they also do is have the commissioning of all victim services, or they certainly do in Thames Valley. So a really important role there, and a really important role with our community safety partnerships within local councils, working out what priorities are and things like that. So it is an odd relationship, and quite often you hear the PCC is in charge of the police. They're not. The chief constable is in charge of the police. The PCC holds to account on behalf of you, the community, the police chief constable.
So if you were chief constable, just tick people away. What would your top 3 priorities be?
What would my priorities be? So for me, my focus is always around victims, and that is the current priority of our chief now, and would absolutely be my priority in terms of that. If you look after your victim, then everything else falls into place. You get trust and confidence, you are able to fight crime because they give you the evidence that you need. So I would absolutely say, victim focus is the key for me. I think there's also something around our workforce though. I personally don't think there is enough of us. I don't think we're paid enough, especially the lower ranks. I think there is something around looking after the police. The police are the public and the public are the police. You need us and we need you. We need to look after our staff. And then I suppose the third thing is just around how we work with our communities, just because of that kind of Pelian principle around policing is the public. So, real focus on that community activity together, that co-production of outcomes. The police have a very specific role in terms of fighting crime, but actually you can't do that without the information, the intelligence, the support of your community. So, yeah.
And you talk about supporting victims. Obviously, people would assume that's a key part of being a police officer, but I think sometimes maybe that support can be very difficult for the officers involved. I know for the officers who were working on Bullfinch, which was the big sexual abuse investigation, some of the evidence and what the families have gone through and the girls have gone through is very difficult to hear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was involved in the serious case review of Bullfinch. That's been part of my career, I suppose, as I've worked here in Oxfordshire over the last 20 years or so. I don't think we can underestimate the impact policing has on the people within it. And that is your frontline officers who day in, day out are going and dealing with trauma, people who are at their worst, children that have been abused, dead bodies, traffic accidents, horrific stuff. But that also goes into the control room, the people that are answering the calls to those in distress, the tape clerks who listen to the interviews and type them up, our forensics teams who are going and dealing with those awful scenes. At every step of the way, there are people that are, no doubt traumatised, and individuals deal with that differently. We have really good wellbeing and welfare support, occupational health, all of those kind of things. But there will still be times when I wake up in the night and think about incidents or jobs that I've been to that, in the depths of the night time just come back to you, and that will never go away. So that trauma doesn't stop throughout your career. And even now, I listen to our daily management meeting and you hear the horrific stuff that's gone on, and you don't have to be there. You have that kind of trauma just from listening to what's happened that I think can be difficult to deal with. And it's not just the individuals, it's their families that are affected. So I do think there is something about how we support our police officers and just making sure we do the very best for them.
When cases aren't solved, do they remain open indefinitely? Because obviously there's breakthroughs in forensic evidence, isn't there? And that's led to quite a few cases being solved that had looked like they'd gone cold.
Yeah. So not every case is left open. We will finalise it. We will make a good overview and review of the evidence and the information and make decisions around when things are going to be filed. The cases you're talking about, I think, probably are the murders and the rapes. where they haven't found somebody. Very rare, very few murders are unsolved, and they're generally kind of historic. We generally solve all murders these days. And you know, for those senior investigating officers, it's that itch that won't go away. They don't want to retire. They don't want to leave until they've solved it. We have a really good cold case review team in force that pick up a number of cases and will continually review. And with our forensics teams, we proactively will look at new work in DNA, for example, and put old forensic issues through new processes just to see if we can pick up new evidence. And I sign those off and sign those off quite regularly that we will do that. Because science changes, it's brilliant. And I think that, you know, for me, we will always be watching out for you and we will always find you. And I think, you know, criminals need to remember that. We won't give up when there is a need to not give up.
You say there needs to be more of you. So what advice would you give to anyone thinking about a career in the police?
Well, I'm recruiting you after this. I'll get you to sign up to be a police officer, your new job.
I'll be signing up straight away and taking my pension almost immediately.
I mean, I hope from what I've said to you today, you kind of understand my passion for policing and my desire to do the right thing, to make improvements, to look after our communities. I think it's been a wonderful job. It's really varied. You know, I've done everything from I was the city centre and Jericho neighbourhood inspector at one point in my career. I've been in the surveillance team. I've been a child abuse investigation detective. The thing about policing is there are so many different bits to the career that you have. And it used to be a 30-year career. It's quite a bit longer than that now, I think, with all the changes in pensions. But every day is like a new day. I learn something every day. Every day is different. It's not an office job. You know, you are always being involved in different things. Now, at the rank I am a strategic firearms commander. I've never done firearms in my life. I've never shot a gun. My husband has been a firearms officer and I've always stayed well away from that world. Now he has retired. I have become a firearms commander. So I kind of think 23 years on, I never imagined that I would be in charge of the guns and making the decisions about whether or not we arm our officers at certain things. I'm now a public order commander. I've never done public order riot policing in my career, but I am at command level. I have done all the training now to command those kind of events. So you're constantly learning and developing and changing. So, you know, it is a fabulous career. It's hard. And you have to have resilience and you have to have good support around you to be able to do it. But I would encourage anybody and often do.
Yoo-hoo!